Dorsey. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G for the gospel of Jesus Christ and little g, all the good things that people do to put that gospel of life into action. On February the 10th, we had a special luncheon called Hearts for Life, and we had a magnificent guest speaker. Her name is Pam Stenzel, and Pam gave a most inspiring talk to about 200 people present. We thought that we would bring you her presentation today, and she makes a very important point. Sometimes people say that people who are raped or victims of incest or the sex trafficking industry should be entitled to an abortion. Pam thinks differently. Listen to this talk.
But it's been a privilege to work with community pregnancy clinics. And I was part of the expansion when we decided to open up at the University of Florida. And let me tell you why. And it's really important to understand that when you look at abortion ratios and you look at STI infection rates, and they follow hand in hand, and you look at the state that you're in, you say the state of Florida. Well, first of all, the state of Florida is third in the highest rates of abortion. We're only behind New York and California. So we have the highest abortion rate in the country. There are 5 states in the U.S. that will have if we looked at those 5 states, California, New York, Florida, Texas, and Illinois. Those 5 states account for 50% of all abortions done in the entire country. So we understand in Florida we have a problem. So now let's break it down and look at what's going on in the state of Florida. If we looked at the abortion ratio per live birth, in other words, how many abortions per live birth by county, what would you say would be the highest rate in the state of Florida? County. Everybody says, at least you didn't say the villages. I'm used to hearing that. It's like, that is a rumor. It's a rumor. That is not the highest STI rate in the villages. No, the number 1 county highest abortion ratio per live birth is Leon County, which is Tallahassee, which is Florida State University. The number 2 is Alachua, which is Gainesville, which is the University of Florida. You can literally follow these numbers by the university campuses and that system. So any place where you have a university, you're going to see these numbers. We had the highest STI infection rate we have ever had in the history of following this. We've been following it for, at least 40, 50 years, but certainly closely since the 80s. We had the highest infection rate the CDC has reported ever in 2019, which is the last year I have stats for. We had 26 million new infections in the United States, and almost 60% of those were people between the ages of 15 and 24. There's our epicenter. We know where the problem is. We know if we're going to impact and change these rates and these stats that we've got to reach that generation. And so it's been, we decided to put ourselves right on campus. We literally are on University Drive. I can see out our conference room window, the football stadium at UF. And we wanted to be very visible and right there because it's so important. That's the age group we've got to be speaking to. That's who we need to be in front of. That's who we need to be talking about. And not just about the life issues, but also about human sexuality and relationships and the decisions they're making. And as you know, we're in a critical place there. I ran a pregnancy center for years in Minnesota, and back in the day, these girls would come into my clinic, and they would, obviously they were there to get a pregnancy test. They were very afraid of, their biggest fear was pregnancy. I've had to tell so many people, pregnancy is not a disease. It's survivable. You can live through it, right? There are far worse consequences to decisions you're making, but they're worried about pregnancy. I do the pregnancy test. It's negative. I walk in and I say, sweetheart, your pregnancy test is negative. You're not pregnant. She gets this look of relief over her face, like I am off the hook, not pregnant. Thank you very much. Let me out of your clinic. Wait a minute. Have you been tested for syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, chlamydia, trichomonas, papillomatosis, arthritis, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HPV, HIV? You been tested for that? Me, I live in Naples. I don't live in Fort Myers. You mean I would need to be tested for that? This little girl is in my clinic. thinking she could possibly be pregnant, and she doesn't think she can have an STD. Astounding. Our kids have a 4 times greater risk of contracting an STD than they ever have of being pregnant. Pregnant teen girls in Florida are carrying, on average, 2.3 sexually transmitted infections. Not 1, not 2, most of them 3 or more. But they weren't worried about the STD. They were worried about getting pregnant. Because our culture has turned pregnancy into a disease and completely downplay the reality of the consequences of STI infection. If you would have graduated high school in 1964, anybody want to admit you can remember that year? High school graduation. 1 in 34 of your classmates would have been infected with an STD. You would have had to have a few partners. If you graduated with me in the dark ages of 1982, 1 in 18 of our classmates were infected. Today it's 1 in 3. This is where we have come when we have a situation where sex has no boundaries and where all of a sudden we're paying this massive price, not just an STI infection, but obviously an abortion. The biggest problem with it, and I was talking to some people about this earlier today. I've been doing this for so long. And one of the things our students don't understand is that women are at a highest risk both for infection as well as for the permanent consequences. We have over 30 sexually transmitted infections we're dealing with today. 26 of them primarily damage women. The other 4 damage both. Fair? Not fair. And I would have to look at these girls and remind them that they are paying a different price. The score is not even. And for years in schools, I would do it like this. In case you missed this in 6th grade human reproduction and anatomy, we're different. Boys and girls' bodies are not the same. And of course the kids would laugh, like, who's this crazy speaker telling us something that's obvious, right? That is the most controversial part of my talk today. The inability to just simply say, there is a biological difference between men and women. What in the world? I was speaking at a faith-based conference, a youth conference, and I'm prefacing it that it was faith-based. I'm not going to tell you which one. Because, there's certain things you expect from our kids who go to church occasionally. And so I got done with my talk, and this young lady came to speak to me, young teenage girl. And she goes, well, what STDs does my boyfriend have to worry about? I said, did you miss my whole talk? Because all of them. I said, but the difference is that for him, the consequences are going to infertility, cervical cancer, all these consequences won't be the same for him. They're going to be far greater for you. Well, then she still looked confused. And I'm like, what is her problem? Like, I think I'm pretty clear. She goes, well, my boyfriend is transitioning. I looked at her and I said, you are telling me that your boyfriend is a biological female. And she wasn't even sure how to answer that, but how are we going to have it? She admitted, I said, your boyfriend needs a pap smear. Science. This is how incredibly confused this generation is. And let me just tell you, this is not something that happened 10 years ago. I mean, we can show you the foundation for it and how we got to this place. But this utter confusion where we cannot even have basic biological discussion about science and disease and how it's transmitted and who can get pregnant and who can't and what that means. Do you know what I mean? That is really probably just been the last 2 years of utter confusion. And the most controversial thing I used to do when I used to speak in schools, public schools, was the fact that I would suggest that condoms might not be safe, that you could not have sex with 15 different people, use a piece of latex and not have to worry about it. There's always a consequence. Condoms aren't safe, they failed, okay? That was the most controversial thing that I would say, the fact that, that in monogamy doesn't mean one at a time. They didn't like that either, but that's where, and then they would call us medically inaccurate. They would say all kinds of crazy things. about what we were teaching students. Today, I can't even imagine. You're not allowed on a public school campus because you just say there's a difference between boys and girls and this is how a disease is transmitted. We are in la-la land. I don't even know. I can't even have a right conversation. It's crazy. So I think it's important that we understand that as long as there's this much confusion around sexuality, there's going to always be a need. What's going on for our girls who do find themselves pregnant? They're scared. They don't, typically we've been able to reach out to women. Obviously, we do it at our pregnancy centers. We offer free pregnancy testing, ultrasounds. We do STI testing. I think it's very, very important that be done in our clinics. So we're doing that as well. But the reality is we've been able to have a wonderful presence outside of a lot of these abortion clinics. Many of you have probably participated in some 40 Days for Life. We've been able to be what we call at that front line. We've placed our clinics directly in the parking lot of Planned Parenthood in Sarasota. And we have a clinic, Creech Road, literally right across the street, if you've not seen that. We put ourselves there. Why? Because up to this point, most women seeking an abortion had to go to a clinic. Following me? This has all changed. COVID began to change the way they're looking at it with the Texas heartbeat law. The abortion industry has said we have got to find a way to be able to get to these women without them ever having to don the door of a clinic. They've focused everything now on the chemical abortion, which is horrific because chemical abortion needs to be given. It's a pill given in 2 doses. One they were supposed to be taking at the clinic in front of a physician after they'd had an ultrasound, had pregnancy. We knew the pregnancy was viable. We knew the pregnancy was not ectopic. We knew the pregnancy was where it was supposed to be. And we knew the exact gestational age. That needed to be done prior to giving these very lethal drugs. She would be given that first drug in the clinic. She would be sent home with a drug that she was supposed to take 48 hours later. And at that point, then the first drug would basically starve the baby to death. And then that second drug causes her to go into labor where she then expels this now dead baby at home, in her bathtub, in her toilet, in her bed, all alone with nobody knowing. It's absolutely horrific. So many dangers that can happen with this medication. During COVID, certain abortionists and clearly Planned Parenthood at the head of it went to the FDA and said, it's too dangerous to see girls in person. There's COVID. So they started doing drive-through abortions where girls would just have a telemed conversation. You can't do an ultrasound telemed, let me just tell you. And then they would drive up to the abortion clinic. The staffer would come out, hand her a paper bag, and of course have her credit card machine because we got to take cash. Hand her both drugs through the window of her car, take her money, and she would drive off and have to complete the abortion process herself. Never an ultrasound, not knowing how far along she is, not knowing if baby's viable, none of that. So we fought that for a long time, and hopefully that you know that the FDA just recently released the REMS, and they've asked permission to make that permanent, that we should be able to give chemical abortions telemed without ever doing those things. We have said in our clinics over and over and over to these girls, there's 3 things you need to have before you make a decision for an abortion. You need a pregnancy test. You need an ultrasound. We need to know that baby's viable, and we need to know exactly how far along you are. And you need an STI test. You need to be clear of any STI infection because having an abortion with an active infection has a tremendous cause of infertility, pelvic inflammatory disease. It could make her sterile. She needs to have that information before she does this. The only way we're going to be able to combat this new process where they're trying to push this way is to be able to get to every young woman and remind them that these are necessary medical tests that they must go through before they make a decision, and they can't be victims of this abortions industry trying to permanently harm them. And I think as a movement, we've got a lot on our table. And one of the things I love about Actions for Life and all of you here is that all of you have been called at some level to fight this evil of abortion. And some of it's at the school board, some of it's in your county and making Naples a sanctuary for the unborn. Some of it's in education, some of it like we are, and we have other pregnancy resource center here as well, who are actively reaching directly to that women. Some of you have been prayerful outside of the abortion clinic. All of these things. It's very important that we come together like this, those of us who are like-minded, and say we've got to attack this problem together at every side possible. And what all of us bring to this movement is important. Every piece of this puzzle is important. And I might not personally be able to do all of the pieces, but this is the piece that God's telling me to do. And this is what I'm called the battle on this end. And I'm going to do that to the best of my ability. But pro-life people, we need to start talking, and we cannot be 10 years behind the other movement and let them go forward and do things that we weren't ready for. This is where they're going. And we've got to know that, and we've got to strategically say, here's where we need to be in order to reach out to young women in crisis and offer them hope. We do have abortion pill reversal at our clinics. In other words, a girl takes that first med, she regrets it. If she'll call us, we can get progesterone on board. It's natural. It's done for women who are experiencing risk of miscarriage. It's nothing that... And if she can get that progesterone on board quickly, we can save the life of that baby. We've had 7 babies delivered in community pregnancy clinics who were saved from abortion pill reversal.
As you can imagine, producing this wonderful program, Action for Life, it costs a great deal of money. We're going to need your help. So if you would like to donate to keep this good news program on the air, please go to your computer, your cell phone, actionforlife.net. And now for our thought for the day. Prayer is extremely important. We're not fighting a battle just against earthly powers. We're fighting a battle against evil. Please take some time each day to pray and ask God for the strength that you need and that we need to keep up the battle for life.
But here's the problem. Young women need to know that's possible, right? You got a 48-hour window or less that she needs to know that there might be something she can do to make that change. So it's so important that all of us are educating, that all of us are saying the right things, and all of us are educating our kids. Of course, you know, God called me really strongly to start to speak to kids about sex before they even get there. I'm not the sex police. I tell people that all the time. What I want is for no other teenager, young person, student to ever have to say, nobody told me. I didn't know. They were told. What they choose to do at the end of their decision is up to them. But there is a consequence to sex outside of marriage, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And it's so important that they fully understand that. A lot of us got involved in this movement in many of its levels. And it's funny because when God calls you to speak for life and to speak for truth, I started at the pregnancy center level dealing with that woman. And then I started speaking to teens about sex kind of prevention, which matters to me. And then I met a really good friend, took her with me to South Africa on a speaking tour. I was speaking in Cape Town, South Africa in churches. And this good friend of mine was a firefighter paramedic, had been abandoned as an infant in 1973. But we were walking into this church, and built into the side of the church looked like a bank deposit box, you know, like it was kind of big, and it said baby safe. And we're like, what is that? And the pastor said, we've had so many infants abandoned right around our church. The last one, some boys were playing soccer or football as they call it, in a field right next to their church, some young boys, and they saw a garbage bag and it was moving, and they went over and there was a baby boy, placenta still attached in that garbage bag. Thankfully, he lived, and a couple from their church adopted him and named him Moses. Little Moses is, I think, 10 now. But the pastor said, that's not going to happen on my watch. And he built this device into his church that a woman could walk up, open that door built into the side of their church. 911 an alarm would be sounded. She could place that baby in that safe place that's temperature controlled. And when she shuts the door, it locks, and baby can only be retrieved from the inside of the building. And they've saved literally hundreds of babies via that way. So my girlfriend decided she needed to do that. She's from Indiana, got together with Mike Pence. He passed the law. And in 2015, Indiana became the first state to have safe haven baby boxes built into fire stations. It's very exciting. We now have 100 boxes in 5 states. We have one in the state of Florida. It's in Ocala. We're going to have 2. Yay, I'm so excited. Oh, thank you so much. So Actions for Life, so you know, and this is not giving you permission to call me whenever your little heart feels like it. I answer that national hotline. So I'm the one who gets the call at 2 o'clock in the morning from a scared young woman who doesn't know what to do, and I get to be the one to help her find a way to safely relinquish her child, be it in a box or walk face to face. And so, you know, Action for Life, we had baby number 112 safely relinquished Tuesday night in Conway, Arkansas. Healthy baby boy. Very excited about that. So now I have been able to work in the pro-life movement from the beginning, before getting a whole bunch of people not to have sex, in the middle through the crisis with women who need that help, and now at the very end, saving newborns from risk of abandonment, and it's been a beautiful thing. We all get involved, we all get involved passionately in what we do, typically personally, and I'm no different. 56 years ago, a young 15-year-old girl became pregnant. She had a lot of difficult choices to make. Maybe more so than some 15-year-old girls, she was raped. But this teenage girl chose to give her child life, and then to place that child with an adoptive family. And that child was me. My biological father is a rapist. I don't even know my ethnicity, but I am still a human being, and I still have value. And I don't believe that my life is worth less than yours just because of the way I was conceived. And I do not believe that I deserve the death penalty for the crime of my biological father. And listen, I've listened to the rhetoric my whole life, people. I've listened to people say, well, every child should be wanted and planned. I've heard this said in the church. Well, I wouldn't have an abortion. That's horrible. I wouldn't kill my child. But if it were rape, you're a mistake, Pam. I don't believe that. I believe that every child is wanted by someone. And I believe that God in his mercy had a plan for me. And I can't explain that to you, and you can't me. Don't try. I was every Bible professor's worst nightmare in college. So you want to talk about the sovereignty of God and free will of man? Because I have a question, and be careful how you answer it. Did God plan me? I was wanted little. I memorized a verse that went like this. I knew you before the foundations of the world. I formed you in your mother's womb. Did that mean me, or did that just mean you? Did God look down that night in November of 1964 and say, oops, what I'm going to do, this big mistake right here? I don't have all the answers. People of God, this is what I know. I know that my God is so awesome and so amazing that he is capable of taking your worst pain, whether it was something you chose or whether it was something that was done to you. And my God can make something very beautiful come from that. That's amazing grace. That's redemption. I'm the oldest of 8 children. 7 of us adopted. My brother, just younger than me, is the bio child, the real one. My parents tried to get pregnant for 7 years, couldn't get pregnant, adopted me. Mom found out she was pregnant 3 weeks later. and then adopted 6 more. We are the United Nations by ourselves, every color of the rainbow in my family. And I know that my family was a gift from a very scared 15-year-old girl. And I have spent my life walking alongside young women experiencing a crisis pregnancy because I know that what my birth mother needed in that horrible time of pain and trauma was not to have me ripped violently from her womb. What she needed was someone to love her. What she needed was someone to come alongside her, someone to say, we're gonna walk this with you, we're gonna be there for you. And that is what we do in our pregnancy clinics every single day. Walking alongside that woman in crisis through her pregnancy and beyond to make sure that she's loved and cared for, and in that care can give life to her child. That's what this is about. Let me just say this to you in closing, to my good friends who have been fighting this battle a very long time. And it's easy to get tired. It's easy to think you can retire, right, Kathleen? Because we're not allowed to retire ever. And I know Mother Teresa has already been quoted, but this has been a quote from Mother Teresa that has formed my ministry and that I remember almost every day. Mother Teresa said this: God did not call us to be successful. He called us to be faithful. We need to commit to be faithful, because my only hope is one day to run into the arms of Jesus and hear these words: well done, thou good and faithful servant. Let's all commit to be faithful. God bless you.
I want to thank Pam for the wonderful presentation that she gave us. And as you can see and hear, Pam's for action, I'm for action, and I hope you are too. We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.